Hallelujah, Yahweh. Praise to Yeshua, the Christ, the Messiah that came, died on the cross, and was risen to bring eternal life to all those that believe. With that being said, we know for a fact that in the beginning, we've been lied to about all of our history. I've sat down and put many a post about the separation of genes, compared the past to the present, and then showed you what was going to happen in the future and how so much has been covered up through and with technology. With that being said, we've been lied to and thought a lot of the stuff that was in the scriptures were fairy tale. All right. Yeshua spoke of unclean spirits, and he spoke of the separation of good and evil. In Romans, it speaks to how you can tell who they are, if they are of God or not of God, by their conscience and the way they think, act emotionally, which was the sign of God. Because to carry the sign of God is to think, feel, and talk and walk spirit, righteously. With that being said, now they're starting to come out about the giants and giant bones, and these people actually existed. The problem is that we don't think that they're alive, but they are. What I'm about to show you is a real quick footage of an Air Force member that is in Afghanistan, stating that they've been finding these giants, these red-haired, white, pale-skinned giants in the mountains that are 12 feet tall, 1,100 pounds, with feet about the size of 25 inches to 30 inches. This is real, you guys. Okay, God has woken me up. Yeshua has came and woken me up. And I'm going to keep it gully with you. For me to change around, for those who know me know I was never like this growing up. And whatever vision and whatever I went through that has woken me up to who I am as a Hebrew, to give out the messages and show me the messages. I mean, the Lord Yeshua has been on point with everything, because I just don't go with whatever he shows me or whatever God and me talk about, or I go through spiritually. I go and I verify whatever I see, because you can be fooled. Just like the Muslims were fooled by Satan with the angel Gabriel. All right, because before that they were a bunch of nomads killing little girl babies. They just conformed the Hebrew religion into their religion, and they still do a lot of murderous things. Not all of them, but that's the separation between the sower and the seed, and weaving out the roots that Yeshua talked about. Apparently the humans are going to end up killing themselves, but we could tell who is of God and who isn't, because they're going to weave their own self out between the unrighteous and the righteousness. Now let me get back to this footage and show you guys this is 100% true what they found. So to let you know that this is not a game, this is not fantasy, and this is not fiction. All right, this is actually real.
Something that's ancient bones. We're not talking about something that's quote unquote just legend. We're talking about a real evil entity, and he'll relate to you the story of what the special forces guys told him of what they found in the way of the remains of the normal group that was going into the mountains of Afghanistan to find the Taliban. In essence, when I say these are not usually nice guys out of fairy tales, that they're cannibals, I'll let him tell the story. And again, we're just going to refer to him as the pilot.
Just the pilot. We'll go to him now. Hello there.
Hello, how you doing, Mr. Norman?
Fine, good, and thank you. Thank you for not only the email you sent to Stephen, but making yourself available here. Tell me a little bit about your serve of duty and where you were, and then we'll get into what you saw, what you witnessed.
Well, basically, for us, it would be just a normal deployment over to the Middle East, going both directions. I would say going to Iraq and going into Afghanistan. As the Air Force does it, we do much shorter deployments, but we do a lot of them.
Okay, so there you are in the hills of Afghanistan. How many troop members are you with?
Well, on my crew, we had 6 on my crew. When you say hills of Afghanistan, for us, we did not fly into the wilderness. We actually flew into a base. I guess this thing was transloaded out of the mountains by a CH-47. So brought it into the larger air base where we took it out.
Okay, now describe exactly what you had, what you saw.
Well, when we came up, basically came outside, we had a normal 463L pallet loaded down with what they told us was a giant. okay. When I walked out to it, she was pretty much covered up, and of course the guys were looking at it, laying down next to it, and basically showing its size. Couldn't see a whole lot of it, to tell you the truth, because it was covered up. Couldn't poke it, couldn't measure it or anything like that. What I could see that I thought was extremely interesting after actually listening to one of your shows was that it did have the 6 fingers, and I remember taking my foot up and placing it up next to its foot, and it was extremely large. And when I say large, we're not talking wrestling large here. We're talking, this thing was pretty proportionally sized, more or less like a fairy tale giant type thing. That's why I initially took the interest when I heard your show.
All right. Now, Stephen was telling us about the danger, the crisis with this thing as well, that I may have attacked or eaten troops as well. Stephen, I want to bring you in on this now.
Okay. Well, I think, again, the thing is that if the pilot would tell you how big the pallet was, and this giant was put into a fetal position, and when he first contacted me, the pilot said, I estimated that because these pallets have a specific size, and go ahead, pilot, and tell the size, but he said it had to be 10 to 12 feet, but it wasn't just the size lengthwise. I think the pilot told me, too, that his feet were 25 to 30 inches. Go ahead, pilot, and tell about the pallet so people know. By the way, he's a C-130 pilot, so go ahead if you would.
Roger that. It's the standard size pallet. It's approximately 9 by 7, a little bit bigger than 7 feet. And when it was laying there, it wasn't like just stretched out. It was more or less on its side, curled up in a fetal position and diagonal. And that's basically why I said to Mr. Coyle earlier that the size to me had to be estimated based on that size, where we estimated at about 12 feet, give or take. What I can tell you is the weight of the thing, basically, it was approximately 1,500 pounds what was getting on the aircraft. Now, if you take away the pallet weight and all the rigging that we had to hold this thing down, we figured it around 1,100 pounds. And stepping back a little bit, the babysitters that's what I called them at the time, the babysitters who had come in and out of the mountain, not sure if they were shooters. Well, they would claim to be shooters, and most of those guys do.
Yeah.
But they basically said that when they got this thing, it had actually taken out the first crew that had found him, and they went in afterwards. And of course, when they came up on this thing, supposedly, of course, secondhand, thing ran like the wind. Reported to us that threw stones at the guys at a pretty good distance, so they said. And of course, our weapons did take it out because I was looking at this dead thing. So.
Now, did it look like an Afghani, or how was it suited up?
Well, you know what? That was one of the things that I remember most about it was I was expecting to look a lot more like an Afghani, but when I saw the fingers, at least, it was pretty pasty white, more or less. I would call it Caucasian skin. Then again, it was dead, so that might be attributed to that. Most of it was covered up with the tarps and the rigging and stuff like that. And most of what we had to see, we were just goofing around with and seeing what we could see on this thing because it was a pretty large dude.
But it was said to you, was it not, pilot, that this is a giant? And again, when tell, if you would, the smell, because that's the tattletale. Try and describe the grossness of the odor. Because, again, this is really relevant to what we're going to talk about.
Well, was it decomposing, Stephen, or is this something else?
No, because of their metabolism and their respiration, their perspiration, they have a very horrid odor. Interestingly enough, when Jesus speaks of unclean spirits, the word unclean means literally foul-smelling.
Huh.
So what I want to bring in is the supernatural nature of what it was that inhabited.
Well, it probably never takes a bath either, right?
Well, and not only that, but go ahead, pilot, if you would just share kind of the putrefaction or whatever words that you would use to describe it.
Well, this would be one of those great times that I have my roadmaster explain that one because he had to sit back there with it. However, it was pretty stinky. I would say related kind of like a musty scented skunk, really. Yeah, it did actually smell like it was decaying, but it was more than that.
Right. It's interesting, George, because of the metabolism, and do you want me just to enter in? Because of the metabolism, it's interesting that when I first talked to the pilot, that's one of the things that he keyed in on, that I knew that he had really found this thing out, because again, their perspiration, their respiration, we're talking about a heart that has to pump a lot of goo, and I use goo because the word blood, yeah, it is blood, but it's more than that. And the thing that my friend the pilot was talking about was the fact that even when the second team encountered it, by the way, if you remember, pilot, when we talked, you said that basically when the second team, the special forces guys, went in to kill this thing, there were basically, rib cages and skulls? I mean, it looked like, the killing fields?
I would call it the standard stories that come in out of these guys. Again, like I said, it was secondhand, but the way they painted it out, yes, this guy was eating probably more than our guys with the killing fields that they more or less described.
Did it look human other than its size?
Again, it was mostly covered up. Could not, poke it, measure it, or anything like that. I can tell you that its hands more or less looked kind of human, very dirty, except for the 6 fingers.
Okay, yeah, we don't know if it had sandals on or shoes or barefoot.
Actually, it had like canvas over its feet, more or less, like rudimentary shoes that you'd have to put over a foot that was approximately, 30 inches or so.
All right.
There's just no way you can make a shoe.
Right, Stephen, how do we know that this just wasn't a freak of nature?
Well, it's because the freak of nature, okay, polydactylism is a technical term for 6 fingers, 6 toes, but remember, the gentleman, first of all, if you can do a neat thing. Physiologically, you can pretty well sculpt out the body if you know the weight and you know the height, you get the measurements. I think, pilot, correct me, but you thought the foot were about 25 to 30 inches?
That's what I'd estimated.
Yeah. Typically on a 12-footer, okay, they run 36 inches. I'm not kidding. There's just certain parameters. But the thing is a freak of nature, George, these are the very same reports. But when my friend the pilot contacted me, and you and I spoke about it on Coast to Coast, interestingly enough, a group of these in a certain underground base in Arizona had broken loose past the red line and killed about a half a dozen scientists. When my friend the pilot brought this story to me, it synced up and linked up with some other guys that are sent in to basically secure these things. I mean, we're talking strength that is just unimaginable. And the fact that the pilot, when you're talking 1,100 pounds, again, if you would, pilot, explain the size of the hand compared to a human hand, because it's not just, a lot of people think these giants are just, tall and like skinny Maasai or something. And I'm only saying that just to put down the Maasai, but very slender build. But what I am saying is the proportional strength of muscles and everything is so unusual that that's how we know, George, that it's not a freak of nature. In other words, by the collective testimony of history, by the collective testimony of the military, and by the way, there are people that listen to this show tonight that have literally been in the, what I call, incubatoriums or the giant centers on South Pacific Islands that are without names. I mean, if you went onto an nautical chart, you'd never see it, but they make the island of Dr. Moreau sing like a nursery rhyme pony farm. And I mean, that's how bad these things are.
All right, Stephen, and where do we think this body went? Where was it taken?
Let the pilot answer that, because he's the one that flew it.
All right.
Well, we basically took her back to our home base, and she was transloaded on a much faster jet headed back home. Now, again, third hand, I did question some of the stuff to find out, where it was going, and from what we could tell, it was basically transloaded back to a base in Ohio. When I talked to Steve, there's a real Air Force base in Ohio.
And that's interesting because that's where all the alien artifacts are usually put.
That's what we've heard.